Dear Les Levidow, a co-founder of the Campaign Against Criminalizing Communities, the CAMPACC, and Freedom for Ocalan Campaign supporter, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. So today's topic is the PKK and delisting the PKK from the terrorist organizations. As we know, the British government is politically benefiting from the isolation of Kurdish leader Mr. Abdullah Öcalan as well. So why was the PKK listed as a terrorist organization in the UK in the first place? Let's start with that one.
Yes. The PKK was among many organizations that were initially banned under the Terrorism Act 2000. As the official reason, such powers to ban and the specific bans would help to protect the public from violent threats. But this official reason was very different than the real political reason. Namely, movements for national self determination have often gained global public support, which becomes a political problem for Western allies of oppressive regimes, such as Israel, Turkey, India, and so on. According to a key expert report in 1998, a terrorist group looks internationally for any ideological, political, or diplomatic support that it can obtain. Sub-state terrorism is typically the weapon of the weak. That's the end of the quote. But the report continued. In order to undermine and prevent such political support, it's necessary to adopt broad, permanent anti terrorist powers. And that was done in the Terrorism Act 2000, which defined terrorism to include simply the threat of serious damage to property in ways designed to influence the government for a political cause. Of course, this description would include the long history of political protests in this country and elsewhere. Now, under that law, organizations could be banned in the UK on the basis that their activities anywhere in the world fit the broad, vague definition of terrorism. Moreover, it became a terrorist crime to display the symbols of a banned organization, to speak at the same public event where a representative may be speaking, or to associate with its members in any way. And on that basis, in early 2001, the UK government banned 21 organizations. The list predictably included many organizations resisting oppression abroad, which we called national liberation movements, such as the PKK, the Tamil Tigers, and Hamas. Soon the UK persuaded the European Union and the United Nations to adopt similar counter-terror frameworks. Shortly after the enactment, there was a public meeting organized by CAMPACC where the Member of Parliament, Tony Benn, denounced the entire anti terror framework. He said this was an agreement among governments of the world, really, well, meaning especially Western governments, that no government will be challenged from inside with support from outside. This has little to do with terrorism. In a global economy, Britain wants to trade with repressive regimes. And if they complain that there are people in London campaigning for Kurdish rights, for Tamil rights, or for Kashmiri rights, then the British government is expected to respond. That's the end of quote from his speech. And respond, you can see what that means in these so-called counter-terror powers. In addition, in the case of Turkey, its role in NATO has been an extra motive for the UK government to collude with the regime by labeling and persecuting Kurdish activists in this country as terrorists or as associating with terrorism.
Given that the PKK has not committed acts of terrorism on British soil and does not seem to be a threat to British interest abroad as well, why is it still listed as a terrorist organization?
We could ask the same question about all the other organizations that were banned in 2001 or more recently, and why all of them are still banned. Because most or all of them had committed no violent acts in the UK and still have not done so. They never had any credible intention to do so. So there was no violent threat to be prevented by these special powers. But mass support for those organizations here has disturbed or embarrassed the UK's alliance with oppressive regimes from which migrant groups have fled. The same ones that I mentioned before, such as Turkey, um, and Israel, Palestine, among others. So this original political reason continues. A few years ago, all European countries agreed that the European Union would pay substantial funds for Turkey to police and contain refugees whose numbers were increasing, especially from Syria and other places in the Middle East. Afterwards, Turkey threatened to release the refugees, to flee to the West, if it was displeased by the foreign policy of European governments. So these may be extra reasons for the ban to continue pleasing the terrorist regime of Turkey.
What has been the impact of the proscribing of the PKK on the efforts to achieve a peace settlement in Turkey?
Well, the ban has strengthened the Turkish government's policy to demonize and persecute Kurdish activists as terrorists. And likewise, the ban has marginalized voices in Turkey and elsewhere who seek a mediation process to end the conflict in a way that would accommodate the democratic rights of the Kurds. I mean, more generally, the same counter-terror powers have given legitimacy to terrorist states and blocked peaceful solutions for their military conflicts.
Can you give examples of the injustice brought about by the listing of the PKK as proscribed as organization? In particular, the impact on the Kurdish community in the UK.
Yes, of course, this was the main political reason for the ban, to target that community. For 2 decades, the British state has systematically persecuted Kurdish activists, organizations, and entire community centers, by intimidating people from ever visiting those centers. The state, claims that these activities, of the centers serve the PKK. Beyond simply intimidating people, the state has used its special powers of the terrorism legislation. For example, criminal prosecutions for alleged association, raiding houses, carrying out systematic surveillance, regularly stopping Kurdish activists or Kurds in general at the UK's border, and so on. So, combined, all these forms of intimidation are meant to frighten people away from even attending events at the community centers.
I want to know what you really think about why should the PKK be delisted now? Is this also will bring freedom for Öcalan?
Yes, well, there are several reasons which I partly mentioned before. Given that the main purpose of the ban or listing is to suppress political dissent, not to stop violence, The ban is inherently unjust, it's anti democratic, it's a systematic attack on civil liberties, on free expression of, well, potentially everyone in this country, but especially of the Kurds, because they are especially targeted by the intimidation. And then the other reason, which I mentioned before, is that the ban deters any efforts at a peace process which could resolve the conflict.
What can be done to delist the PKK? What is the process, and which way should be followed by Kurdish representatives and politicians in Europe?
Well, over the last 2 decades, there have been many efforts by sympathetic lawyers to write legal documents which they submitted, with arguments for why the ban is unjustified. And they've done so in the UK legal procedure as well as in the European Union legal procedure. And it became, difficult for the authorities to justify the ban and to counter their arguments. So it is important that they made those efforts, but of course, these political decisions are decided by much more than legal arguments. So the political pressure will be decisive, that is, especially mass defiance, will be decisive in whether the UK government lifts the ban, and that is very easy to do by an administrative procedure. If the UK government wants to lift the ban, but then it needs to be put under great political pressure to do so.
Dear Les Levidow, a co-founder of the Campaign Against Criminalizing Communities, CAMPACC, thanks for joining us. Thank you for your valuable comments today.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.